Alright, so if you're creating a React app and you have a function inside one of your component which is supposed to fetch some API, and upon re-rendering of that component, that function is called again and again, hence sending way too many HTTP requests to that API. Now this can actually exhaust your user's bandwidth, so to prevent it, you can use useCallback hook in React. So useCallback and useMemo hook are very similar to each other. And if you don't know about useMemo hook, you can just check out my video over here, or you can just continue here also because I'll be continuously comparing these both hooks. So use callback hook lets us cache the complete definition of a function between re-renders. See, the definitions are also very similar to each other, right? So this definition means that a function will only be recreated upon re-rendering if and only if one of its dependencies gets changed. So to explain more about this hook, let me just write some code. So as you can see here, we are inside my code editor, and here I already have imported use callback from React. Now, as I said, use callback and use memo are very similar to each other. So use callback also returns a value. So we can just store that value inside a variable, and let me just call that variable as result and call use callback. Now, use callback also has two parameters, a function and a dependency array. Now, in case of useMemo, the return value used to be a string, an integer, object, array, etc. Right? But in case of use callback, the return value is actually a function. So this function is actually the return function of use callback. So here we write some code, and that function means this function is actually returned as the return value of use callback. So let me just write a function over here, and for that, let's just declare a variable named variable and give it a value of 5. Also put a and b as parameters. So the return value of this function will be product of variable and sum of the parameters. Now, as you can see here, this variable is actually a variable, right? So this function is actually dependent upon this variable named variable. So we can just put it inside this dependency array. So here I just gave you the basic knowledge about use callback hook. Now let's just create an example to see its use case in real life scenario. So this is the React app that I've built, and here we can fetch some different dog breeds images by clicking different dog breeds names like Husky or Samoyed. So here the breed is actually a state of this component. See, initial value of this breed is actually German Shepherd. Now in this app, we can also change its theme by using this theme button. And this theme button is actually changing the state of the component from this true to false or false to true, depending upon whether the theme is dark or light. Now to fetch these cute images of these dogs, we are using this dogcu API, this API, using this getImages function. Now as the return value, this function returns an array which is actually returned by this API. Now one more thing, this function is also getting passed into another component using props, and this is the component. So let's just get inside that component. Now this component also has a state which is images, which has an initial value of an empty array, and that empty array is getting filled using this getImages function which we passed through the props inside this component, and then we are using this setImages function to fill this images array, and this component at the end is returning these images of dogs in this fashion. Now let me just reload this page and open up the console over here. Now as you can see here, inside this console we have something written over here. So this is getting printed actually whenever this getImages function is called. So we are using this useEffect hook to print out the string whenever this getImages function is changed. So now if I change this breed from German Shepherd to Husky, and first let me just clear out this console, this string will be called because this getImages function will be changed. So now let me just change it. See, getImages is called is printed over here, and even if I change from Husky to Samoyed, this thing is getting printed. Now what do you think will happen if I change this theme from dark to light? Will this string get printed or not? Well, let me just first clear the console and then change the theme. Now as you can see, this is getting printed, but this is undesirable because getImages function is called, which means this API is also requested again, and I don't want this API to be fetched unnecessarily because that will only exhaust my user's bandwidth. So to prevent it, we can use useCallback and wrap this function around parentheses and just call useCallback hook. Also, this function is dependent upon this breed variable, because whenever this changes, the API is fetched again, right? So we can just put that variable inside this dependency array. Now let me just reload this page. See, get images, this is getting printed. Let's just remove it. Now if I change from German Shepherd to Husky, this is getting printed over here. And if I change from Husky to Samoyed, this is again getting printed over here, which is totally fine with me. Let me just remove it. Now, if I change the theme, now this get images function should not be called. So let's just try changing the theme. Click, click. See, nothing was printed, which means that this function was not called, which is what I wanted. So here I used useCallback hook to fix this unnecessary fetching of this API. So now you'll be like, hey, can we use useMemo instead of useCallback? Or what is the difference between useCallback and useMemo? Well, let me just answer that question. So useCallback hook is used whenever a function is actually getting passed as a prop. Like in this case, we are passing get images inside this image component as props, right? So now this component actually depends upon this function. So to prevent the unnecessary rendering of this component, we are sharing these get images function only when this get images function actually gets changed, right? So if I want to change something inside this function, then I can just simply change the result value inside this image component over here, instead of changing this original function over here. Now, the useMemo hook is actually used whenever this return value of a function is important. So to get that return value, the function had to do some complex calculations which were very time consuming. So we can just cache that return value and just use it whenever we want. I hope you understood the difference between useMemo and useCallback, and also you understood the useCallback hook as an individual. Now, if you want to learn more about React hooks, you can just check out my video over here.